Hi, everyone. Good morning. Happy Saturday. Welcome to our webinar on soil health basics with Charlotte Canner from Our Water, Our World. I'm really looking forward to everything she has to present today. This is super critical information going into fall planting. Of course, it all starts with soil. So we need to have healthy soil for healthy plants. So looking forward to everything she has to present. We've got a big group today. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A and I'll help go through them and filter them for Charlotte. I do want to let you know that this is being recorded and the recording will be available on Tuesday on our website and also on our YouTube channel. If you subscribe to our YouTube, then you'll get a notification when it's up, but it will be on our website as well. You all should have received, Charlotte has put together some really good resource material and an outline, and you should have received the link to that with the reminder email that you would have got about an hour ago. If you didn't get that, let me know and I'm happy to send the link. And when the recording is up on our website, that information will also be under the recording. And then really quickly, I want to go over upcoming classes. I'm going to do the next one. And it's going to be on succulent pumpkins. It's a fun, super fun craft for the holidays. And I did get a couple emails about people asking about what supplies I'm going to be using because they want to make it at the same time I do. And I completely support that. And I love that. So I'll put out a list of what I'm going to use because I think it would be fun if we all made succulent pumpkins together. And then, so that's on October 20th. And then on October 23rd, Taylor will be doing becoming an indoor plant parent, everything that you need to know. And then after that, Alyssa will be doing indoor plant design on October 27th. So a lot of fun stuff coming up. I'm going to stop talking and let Charlotte start. Like I said, she's got a ton of good information. This is going to run about 45 minutes. And thank you all for joining us. Thanks so much, Charlotte.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Sloat, for having me. That pumpkin succulent design sounds really fun. That sounds like a really fun activity. Maybe I'll have to join that one. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Canner. I'm with Our Water, Our World, and we're going to talk about soil health basics today. My favorite subject. I love soil. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the OWOW program for anyone who are not familiar yet. Watersheds and water quality, talking a little bit about integrated pest management, because that's what the Our Water, Our World program is all about. We'll talk about soil basics, just to understand our soil and be able to talk about it, what is healthy soil and how we make our soil healthy, a little bit about buying soil, and then I have a little big picture thing to talk about at the end, soil and climate, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. Again, it should be about 45 minutes of me talking, and then we'll have room for questions at the end. So first, what is Our Water, Our World? It is a program designed to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality, and we provide pest problem-solving education. So we partner with stores throughout the Bay Area, Sloats in Contra Costa, San Francisco, and Marin, and many other stores, nurseries, and hardware stores throughout the Bay Area. In most stores, what you'll find is an information rack like that photo on the left. That provides free information for you to take about common pest problems. Also, some stores will have QR codes either on the rack or somewhere near the rack or near the aisle in a little poster. We've been adding those so you can just scan and get that fact sheet information right on your phone. At some stores also, there are these little blue tags that we have on the shelves that highlight the eco-friendly products on the shelf. And you can find all the information about fact sheets and eco-friendly products on our website at ourwaterourworld.org. So at Our Water, Our World, we're mostly focused on water pollution prevention by way of talking about pesticides and keeping them out of the waterways. And so the reason we talk about this is because anything we do in our yards, in our gardens, on the street, cleaning our cars, working on the car, walking our pets, that actually has a direct line to our waterways. So everyone lives in a watershed. A watershed is just an area of land that drains into a body of water. Our yards are watersheds, and then of course our cities are watersheds, and then our whole regions are watersheds as well. So in the Bay Area, we're in the San Francisco Bay watershed. This is a massive watershed area. Half of all water that lands on California, either in snow or rain, does drain into the San Francisco Bay. So as you can imagine, it's coming from the mountains, coming from the valleys, all this area, as it drains into different waterways and connects to the bay, it's picking up a lot of stuff with it. So that's pesticides and fertilizers from our yards and farms. It's pet waste, it's motor oil, it's plastic debris and other debris. So we really want to be conscious of what we're doing outside and understand that there is a direct line to our waterways, and we want to do our best to keep our bay and our ocean as clean as possible. And we do this by talking about integrated pest management. And I'm not going to talk too much about pests and pest management today, but I did want to give you an idea of what an IPM is, just so you understand your place in it. So IPM is a decision-making process. We ask a lot of questions, and it's a holistic view. So we're looking at the house, the garden as a whole, and we ask questions like, what really is the problem at hand? Okay, there's a bug on your plant, but let's take a step back. Why is the bug there? Maybe there's an issue with your plant that it's causing it stress and inviting those pest problems. Or maybe a yellowing leaf, you think it might be a fungal disease. Maybe it's just an overwatering problem, and we can make those adjustments. Also, when we understand what the problem is, we can decide if we can live with it. Some pests are just a nuisance, and we can do a few things here and there to reduce their being a nuisance, or some pests can cause real problems and we do need to take care of it and take some action. So some steps in IPM are prevention. So there's a lot of things we can do ahead of time to prevent pest problems from coming into our gardens or our homes. Then there's identification, really focusing on making sure we identify the problem. And especially if it's a pest, an insect or a mammal or any kind of pest, we want to know what it is, because the best way to treat it is to really understand what it is, its life cycle, its natural enemies, and that will help controlling it much easier. And then if we're going to take some action, our action steps are cultural controls, which is really what we're going to talk about today, just bolstering the health of the garden, because healthy gardens are going to be just less attractive to pests. Mechanical controls are traps, barriers, tools, physical things we can use in the garden, fencing, row cover, physical traps that will prevent pests from reaching our plants or our homes. Biological controls, we always love talking about beneficial insects and supporting them in the garden. They do a lot of the pest control for us. So that's what biological controls are, or using other critters out there, either insects, mammals, reptiles, snakes, birds, whatever, to keep the balance in the garden and prevent pest problems. And then chemical controls, which are pesticides, and we always use those as a last resort. We try to use the most narrow spectrum as possible, the most eco-friendly as possible, and use it very sparingly. So what we're going to mostly talk about today is both prevention and cultural controls, which are very similar. And it's really going to be, we're going to boost the health of the garden from the soil up, and because healthy soil will lead to healthy plants, and healthy plants will lead to less pests. So first, we're going to talk about soil basics. I just want everyone to be on the same page about what soil is and certain words we use when we talk about soil. So first, what is soil made out of? It is made out of about 45% mineral particles, about 25% air, 25% water, and that little sliver left, about 5%, is organic matter. Now, organic matter is, the leaf litter, the plant roots, the insects, the invertebrates, the worms, all the living things or dead things that once were alive in the soil. And 5% is really just an average of like good soil, okay soil. That number, 5%, could go up to 10% to be really, really nice soil. It can go up to like 18 or 20%, but at that point, the benefits of that organic material tend to either plateau or decline. So we really want to focus on like that 5 to 10% number for the organic matter in our soil. And we'll talk about how to increase that today. And then soil texture. This is the question when someone might ask you, what kind of soil do you have in your yard? You could have sandy soil. If you're out by a slope boulevard where a slope is, one of the slopes is, you'll probably have sandy soil because the western half of San Francisco, what used to be dunes. So there's a lot of sandy soil out here. That means large particles that you can see, you can hold in your hand, just like at the beach. And then they have large pore spaces in between them. So water and air infiltrates very quickly. And the sand isn't, sandy soil tends to fall apart a lot easier. It doesn't have a very sticky quality. So it's loose, water runs through it quickly. But we'll talk about how to change that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you could have clay soil. Clay soil is microscopic particles, really tightly packed. They're kind of flat, so they really get very tightly packed. And there's very small or little pore spaces between the particles. So water and air has trouble infiltrating, and it does stick together quite well. And then there's silt or loam. They're kind of, the two names are kind of go hand in hand. And that's somewhere in the middle, medium-sized particles and medium-sized pore spaces. And now you can't change your soil texture. If you have sandy soil in your yard, you'll always have sandy soil. But what you can do is we'll talk about how to change the soil structure. So you can change the soil structure. And the structure is the way the particles, either the mineral particles plus the organic matter plus the air and water, how all these ingredients are formed together to create structure. Good soil structure has pore spaces, but it also sticks together to really hold on to water a lot, but enough to allow roots to infiltrate. And it's kind of, it doesn't fall apart, it holds together, but it's not tightly packed. There's some middle ground there. And then this might seem kind of like we don't really need to talk about this here, but I like to talk about it just so we understand what's happening with our plants and the soil. So photosynthesis, we learned about this in grade school or middle school, high school science, but just to review, what photosynthesis is happening is the plants are taking the carbon dioxide from the air, the water from either the soil that we're giving them. They use the sun's energy to create to turn that carbon dioxide and H2O into sugars or carbohydrates. So that C6H12O6, that's carbohydrates. And now those carbohydrates, those sugars, are really the building blocks of the plant. It's the roots, it's the stems, it's the leaves, the flowers, the fruit, all that is that carbohydrates that it's creating. And then they also create oxygen, which they release out into the air for us to breathe. Thank you, plants. But what's happening also underneath the soil is that they do create those sugars, but they also, they don't use all those sugars for their own building blocks. They actually share the sugar that they make, they meaning plants. Plants actually share the sugar that they create, and they pump it down in through their roots, out through their roots, and to feed it through to the microorganisms in the soil. So it was often thought that roots are just like little straws sucking up nutrients and water, just going a one-way street. They're actually, it's a two-way street, and there's an exchange happening below the soil surface. So plants are sharing that sugar with pumping it out through their roots to the soil organisms. And in exchange, the soil organisms are actually feeding the plant. So the soil organisms actually eat that organic matter in the soil, and they process it into nutrients in a way that plants can take up. It's exactly like what's happening in our gut microbiome. There's microbes in our gut that processes the food and feeds us the nutrients back in a way that we can use it. And I just want to share that plants and trees share 20 to 80% of the sugars that they create through photosynthesis with those microbiology. So there's, I don't know, I just love the exchange, and it's really important to understand that exchange when we're thinking about soil health. And then just a little bit more on bacteria and fungi and other microorganisms in the soil. They're so necessary. We have to really focus on the life and nurturing that life in the soil, because they help our plants live. Plants cannot live without life in the soil. So we really want to nurture that life as much as we're nurturing our plants. And there's this mycorrhizal fungi, that picture on the left with the white webby stuff. That mycorrhizal fungi is like this, it's a white web, really. If you dig up healthy soil, you'll see like white stuff on the soil, and that's that mycorrhizal fungi. What happens there is that it locks into plant roots, and it acts as like an extension to the plant roots, so it can go out further looking for that boron, the phosphorus, the zinc, all the things that plant needs. It can go reach out and get it, and then deliver it back to that plant when the plant wants it. So bacteria, fungi, and other invertebrates and other organisms in the soil, they break down organic matter. They store nutrients in the soil. They actually break down toxins and pollutants, which is really important, especially in urban environments. And they hold soil together. That bacteria and fungi create like a gooey a protein called glomalin that holds the soil particles together, again, creating that really good soil structure. And that's what we want for a lot of reasons, a lot of water retention, and just healthy soil. And I will just share this one quote from a book called Teeming with Microbes. A mere teaspoon of good garden soil contains 1 billion invisible bacteria, several yards of equally invisible fungal hyphae, several thousand protozoa, and a few dozen nematodes. And that's just a teaspoon of good garden soil. So really thinking about all that life and seeing how we can nurture it. So what is healthy soil? Healthy soil has higher levels of organic matter. Again, that 5 to 10%, that's a good high level of organic matter. It's alive. It has lots of fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates living in it. It has good water infiltration. That means that when water lands on the soil surface, it can enter at a relatively quick speed. It doesn't pool, but it doesn't rush through either, taking all the nutrients with it. It has high water holding capacity. That means it can hold on to a lot of water. And that's important, especially in our climate when we have long periods without rain. We want that soil to hold on to water as long as it can to feed our plants throughout the year. It filters out toxins. It delivers nutrients to plants when they need it. This is important when we talk about fertilizers later. And it doesn't require chemical fertilizers or pesticides, because your plants are getting the nutrients that they need. So how do we make our soil healthy? This is basically what we're going to talk about the rest of the program. We're going to use compost. We're going to use organic fertilizers. We're going to protect the soil with mulch. We're going to focus on keeping living roots in the soil, and we'll talk about why that's important. We're going to allow for water infiltration by not concreting over our gardens and allowing permeable surfaces. We're going to avoid pesticides, and we're going to focus on encouraging life and diversity both above and below the soil. So first, my favorite subject, compost. I love compost. Ask me about compost. I love it. So what is compost? It's really nature's way of recycling nutrients and materials. Composting technically happens, decomposition happens on the forest floor. It happens everywhere in the garden. Composting is really the controlled activity of that decomposition that us humans can do. We control it, we make it faster, we speed it up by doing things like chopping, turning, adding the correct materials, and making sure that process is fast. But that it's the same process that happens on the forest floor. We're just speeding it up when we compost. And I will just show that compost is the final product, the decomposed organic matter. It's not the food scraps or the materials we're putting into the bin. It's the final product. And then a reminder, we just talked about what soil is. Compost is not soil. Compost is an element of soil, and it can be added to boost that organic matter levels. Why is compost so wonderful? So as I said, you can't change your soil texture. You'll always have sandy soil, but what you can do is you can change the soil structure, and you can do this by adding compost. So if you have sandy soil, you can add compost to your soil, and that's going to glue those big particles together and make it so that when water does infiltrate, it kind of slows it down and it can be held there instead of just rushing through. And then if you have clay soil, adding compost will break up the particles, add pore spaces, and really help water infiltrate much easier, and roots break it up so roots can infiltrate and air and all that, and water can infiltrate. It increases water retention in soil. Compost can hold 5 times its weight in water. So adding compost to the soil will add for more water holding capacity, more water retention. Compost is chock full of microbiology. I know I gave that quote of healthy garden soil, but think of like compost is like I don't know how many times more than that, but it has so much more microbiology than that teaspoon of garden soil because it's pure organic matter. It's just full of different kinds of fungi and bacteria and invertebrates that are working to break down that organic matter. So adding it to your soil will increase the levels of microbiology. Compost can balance pH levels, which is important if you're just starting out and you have your soil is not really the pH levels you want it. Most plants, not all plants, but most plants do like a balanced pH somewhere in the middle. I know some do like more acid, but for the most part, they like a balanced pH. It recycles nutrients. So when we're adding our leaf litter, our garden debris, our food scraps to compost, we're taking those nutrients that have already been created and just putting them back in the soil. It reduces the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides. When we're adding the nutrients and the microbiology and increasing the health of the soil, we're not going to need those chemical fertilizers. And our plants are going to be healthier and happier and less stressed out. So we might not need as many pesticides either. And compost can actually fight off pathogens and not beneficial bacteria in the soil too. Because again, we're adding diversity to our soil. So the more diverse good and bad things in the soil, the more balance there will be. And just a brief note on how to use compost. So if you make your own or you buy some from Sloat or another store, you can use it in a few different ways. You can, if you're putting new plantings in, you want to mix in 1 to 2 inches of compost. It's best, especially if you're doing like a raised bed, you can mix it in 1 to 2 weeks before planting to really let that compost settle in, let that microbiology get acquainted and start doing its work by preparing that soil. You can top dress around existing plantings. It might be a nice time to do that now in the fall. So to give your plants a little more nutrients right before the rains come and the dormant season. So you can put it around the drip line of your trees and shrubs. And then you can either gently dig it in or you just water it in or wait for that rain to come. And it's might rain tomorrow, so maybe today put some compost out. Let that rain water it in also. Just make sure to keep the crown of the plant clear of compost and mulch. You don't want that material butting up right up to the crown, because that could invite fungal problems. You can also make compost tea, which is kind of what it sounds like, mixing compost with water or letting it soak in like a bag or a sock or some sort of material, and then like a tea bag, and just having it soak for about 24 hours. I'm not going to go into, compost tea has some other steps. So if you are interested in making compost tea, I recommend either going on YouTube or looking it up a little bit more, because there are some things you do need to keep in mind with aeration, other ingredients, what water you use, things like that. But you can use that compost tea as soil inoculation. It's going to be chock full of organisms, so you can just water the soil as a soil drench and really increase the microbiology in the soil. You can use it as a liquid fertilizer. It's super nutrient dense. And then you can also use it as a foliar spray, which is just a spray that you spray on the leaves. Sometimes that compost tea can help boost the pest preventative properties of leaves, and help give it that boost as well. And now organic fertilizers. So there's lots of organic fertilizers out there. When we're talking about organic fertilizer, we are talking about fertilizers that have been derived from organic matter. So mushrooms, manure, compost, kelp, bone meal, and blood meal. Whereas synthetic fertilizers are derived generally from fossil fuels. Organic fertilizers do tend to have lower NPK numbers. That's those 3 numbers on the front of the bag or the box or the bottle. Those are important numbers to look at. We'll talk about those in just a moment. Organic fertilizers tend to have lower ones. That doesn't mean it's not going to help your plant. It doesn't mean it's not going to be powerful. It's just, it's going to be more appropriate for your plants and help build your soil as well. Also, because it's derived from organic matter that also has lots of micronutrients in it, it's going to have more than just that NPK. It's going to have all the other micronutrients that your plants need. So it's going to have a more diverse diet for your plants. And it's released slowly into your plants because, as we'll talk about in just a second, you're feeding the soil when you use organic fertilizers. You're feeding those microbiology, so that they're going to process it and then feed it to the plants when the plant wants it. Just to elaborate a little bit more, the differences between organic versus synthetic. We're feeding the soil microbiology, whereas synthetic fertilizer, tends to be kind of like a Red Bull or like steroids for your plant. It's like an injection right to the plant root, force feeding that plant nutrients that it might not be ready for, and it will cause a lot of new growth, which is, in theory great, but it's going to stress out the plant, and that new growth is really attractive to a lot of pests like aphids, scale, thrips, really like that new fresh growth. So too much of that is going to be a little too attractive to plants, and it's also going to be very stressful for it's going to be attractive to pests, and it's going to be stressful for your plants. So again, organic fertilizer, it increases the soil health, it prevents growth spurts. Your plant will still grow, just at a healthier rate. It's going to be sustainable food. Your plants are going to be able to feed off that organic fertilizer for longer periods of time. Organic fertilizers do tend to be a little bit more expensive than synthetic, but over time you don't need to use as much of it because there's a sustainable food source. It also won't run off into local waterways. It's impossible to, it'll stay in the soil, it'll be fed to the soil, and it's organic material, so it's not gonna create problems like algae blooms. It's not gonna burn the plant. It's almost impossible to over fertilize with organic fertilizer. It is more economical. As I said, over time, it will be less money for you and hopefully less pest problems, less pesticides. It's made from natural materials or renewable or byproducts. Again, synthetic fertilizers, it does invite pest problems. It's high in salts, which is really something to be aware of. The more we use synthetic fertilizers, the more salt buildup in our soil, and then our soil will be less able to hold on to that water. When synthetic fertilizers run off, they can contaminate waterways and cause problems like algae blooms. You can easily burn your plant if you use too much of it, and it's manufactured from products extracted from chemical industrial process. So maybe not something you want to be helping with. Again, just a picture of organic fertilizers feeding the soil. The organic matter goes to the soil nutrients, feeds the microorganisms. The microorganisms then give the plant what the plant wants. Plants do ask for nutrients and what it needs. They have like a language, some sort of language happening down there. So the plant's getting what it needs when it wants it. Whereas opposed to chemical fertilizers, you're feeding the plant directly, whether the plant wants it or not, and it can cause growth spurts that invite pest problems. And when you're looking at the fertilizer label, I mentioned those 3 numbers on the front. They're nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is really important for thinking about above ground growth. So green leaves, really helping those stems and leaves grow above the ground. Phosphorus helps both with blooms, like flowering, and with root growth. And then potassium will help with all around well-being. So right now in the fall, we might want to switch up our fertilizer game. So instead of focusing on above ground growth for flowers and plant and veggies, we might want to focus on some root growth, allow our plants to expand and really build a healthy root system during the winter months. And then again, I mentioned organic fertilizers do have other macro and micronutrients, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc, copper, boron, and lots more. So that's why we want to use that organic fertilizer, because it has more diversity of nutrients as well. All right. So let's talk about mulch. What is mulch? It is any material spread over the soil surface as a covering. It can be made of inorganic materials like rubber, rubber really, and then in oyster shells, gravel, things like that, landscape fabric, or it can be made of organic materials like bark, wood chips, lawn clippings, leaves, straw, newspaper. It's really just anything you're putting on the soil surface. We recommend using organic materials, that bark and wood chips. You can get a lot of them for free, sometimes from arborists. So they're plentiful, and they do have a lot of benefits that we'll talk about. So all of these benefits will come more from organic mulches as opposed to rubber or other man-made products. Mulch does protect the soil. It conserves water by reducing evaporation. So it's that layer on top of the soil. It's going to keep your soil cool in the summer and warm in the winter also, which is really important because your plant roots don't like big temperature swings. So if you have a more moderate temperature zone, that's going to be better for your plant roots. Important to think about in the winter, mulch actually can help water infiltrate your soil a lot easier. It just adds, I don't know why, but it does help water infiltration. It feeds soil organisms, so that organic matter, as it breaks down, it will add carbon and other materials and nutrients to your soil. It keeps weeds from sprouting and growing. Also important to think about at this time when we're probably going to start seeing some weeds start popping up. Bark and wood mulch can create habitat for beneficial insects, especially that chunky mulch. They like to live in the little holes and crevices in that mulch. And it reduces soil compaction and erosion. It makes a nice squishy barrier if you do step on it, so you're not smushing the soil, and it holds that soil in place to prevent erosion. And now sheet mulching is a method of mulching that adds an extra barrier to your soil, and it can be really beneficial for your soil. People do use it to get rid of a lawn sometimes. So if you do want to get rid of your lawn, you could sheet mulch just right over it. You don't have to remove the lawn at all. Or if you have a large area that you know in the winter is going to get really weedy and you just don't want to deal with the weeds, sheet mulching is a great way to block those weeds, but still help your soil get healthy over the winter. If you have also an area that you want to plant in, but the soil is just not very healthy, sorry about that. The soil is just not very healthy. You can boost the health of your soil by sheet mulching over time. And then it does defend against tough weeds. And again, as materials break down, it will feed the soil over time. So how to do it? If you have a lawn and you want to get rid of your lawn, you can just mow your lawn, but leave it in place. You don't have to remove it at all. You do want to cut a border away from walkways and patios. And then you want to mark where your sprinkler heads or your irrigation is, so you don't cover it and then, lose where it is later. And now sheet mulching is really just layering compost, cardboard, and mulch. You don't have to use compost, and where you put the compost isn't so necessary. You can put it under the cardboard or above the cardboard if you are using it. It doesn't have there's not really a definite benefit of one over the other. So you're going to either layer your compost down and then put 1 to 3 layers of cardboard over that. I recommend 3 layers, especially if you have tough weeds like field bindweed or oxalis. Definitely 3 layers. Make sure they're overlapping really well so there's no cracks for things to sneak through. Oxalis, and in my personal experience, oxalis and field bindweed will make their way through breaks in the cardboard. They're really tough. And then use definitely 3 inches of mulch on top of that cardboard. And you can sheet mulch now and then wait for it to break down and really nurture the soil over the winter. With the rain, the rains are going to help filter that water down and break up that material and feed the soil. And then plant in the spring, or you can plant right now while you're sheet mulching as well. So you want to cut out holes in the cardboard. You could use 1 gallon size or larger plants. You'll probably want to put compost and organic fertilizer in the hole that you make for the plant. And then make sure you don't plant too low, because remember, you're going to add 3 to 4 inches of mulch on top. So you don't want the plant to be sunken. You want to make sure that root ball is nice and high and it won't be smothered by the mulch. And then make sure that mulch doesn't go right up to the crown of the plant, because we want to give it a little bit of space so as not to invite fungal problems. If you have irrigation, you can put it under a layer of mulch. And then with any plant that you've newly planted, you want to water it really well, really deeply, and then continue watering it while it's getting established. I'm going to just put in a plug here. Even if you get drought tolerant plants, any new plant put in the ground will need at least 6 to 12 months of consistent watering to get established. And then once it's established, it will be more drought tolerant for sure. That's why it's a great time to plant now, when we're going to have hopefully a little more rain, and the soil is going to be more moist for longer. And now cover crops. So it's not, some people like to use, some people think that, we're going to let our soil rest over especially our veggie beds, we're going to let them rest over the winter, and that's how we reinvigorate them. But actually, we don't want to leave our soil bare. Bare soil will be susceptible to wind, rain damage. Heavy rains can really break up that soil structure. Wind can blow our soil away. Sun damage can dry it out. So we actually do want to keep our soil covered. And you can do that with mulch, or you can do that with cover crops. So cover crops are just low cost crops that don't usually really result in a food or any kind of thing except for nutrients in your soil. So they're generally lower cost. They're great for veggie beds that you're not going to be currently planting in, because veggies really do use a lot of nutrients in the soil. So to build up those nutrients again, cover crops are great for that. The cover crops also protect soil from damage and erosion, just like that mulch does. Cover crops feed soil microbes. So we really, having living roots in the soil, constantly, photosynthesizing, feeding those sugars down to the soil microbes, that's going to help keep that microbiology alive and healthy throughout the slower growing season. Some cover crops, like the legumes, like fava beans, have these nodules on their roots, which is what we're showing in these pictures. They replenish, they actually add nitrogen to the soil. They I don't know the specifics of it, but the nodules actually create nitrogen and add it back to the soil. Again, really helpful for veggie beds that will require a lot of nitrogen in the spring. Planting cover crops also is a way to attract beneficials. Some have flowers that beneficials really like, so you'll have those beneficials in your garden all year round. And then having those living roots in your soil over the dormant season is going to improve soil structure and water holding capacity. And some types of cover crops, there's a lot of different kinds. There's fava beans, which is the bean on the left, and then the plant in the middle top. Those are fava beans. They grow really well, really quickly. And then you can harvest, if you do let some go to seed, you can harvest the seeds for next year, or you can harvest them as a food crop. Fava bean tips, also the tip of the plant, actually are really nice and soft, and they're a great addition to salads. Other cover crops are vetch, clovers. I do want to share that clovers and oxalis are very different. That weed that pops up pretty much everywhere in San Francisco is called oxalis. It looks like a clover. It does not have the benefits that actual clovers have. Oxalis is actually, I think it's, Jen can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's wood sorrel or some sort of sorrel. It's not actually a clover, even though it looks like one. So clovers like crimson clover, which is the picture on the bottom, that is a nice flowering cover crop, good for beneficial insects. Cowpea, soybean, sunflowers, flax, and annual ryegrass, and other grasses as well. This is just a very small list, so there's a lot more options for you. It's good to, if you want maximum nutrients in your soil, it's good to cut down your cover crops right at the base, right at the soil surface, right before they go to seed. And we want to cut them down as opposed to pull them out, because we want to leave those roots in the soil. The roots are going to then continue feeding the micronutrients as they decompose and break down in the soil, and we're keeping that soil structure by not pulling them out. And then the top material, the cover crop that you cut off, can be chopped up and worked into soil gently to be used. It's called green manure, or you can put it into a compost pile, super beneficial for a compost pile. And then wait about 3 to 6 weeks after cutting down your plant to plant in your next crop, because you want to have those roots in the soil break down a little bit before you start planting a new crop. And then along the same lines, we do really want to encourage more living roots in the soil. So planting perennials is a great way to have just living roots in your soil all year round. So you can have of course, annuals are great for color and for veggies and for food production, but encouraging perennials is going to be beneficial for your soil. So living roots in the soil all year round are going to feed the soil organisms and hold soil in place. More plants growing will protect soil from heavy rain damage and wind, so reducing erosion and really keep that soil structure. Plants, having more plants, especially during the summer, will shade soil, so reduce evaporation. And then during the winter time, shading the soil will actually reduce weed germination and growth. Perennials also provide food for birds and beneficial insects throughout the year. So again, you're really nurturing that ecosystem. And it is important when you are planting perennials to choose California natives or Mediterranean plants that are going to be adapted to our summer dry climate. They're always, if you choose plants that are going to be good for this climate, they're going to be happier. They're going to make your life easier because ultimately, hopefully, they'll be more drought tolerant. So you'll have to do less watering and care for them because they'll just be happier and less stressed out. Yes, and making sure you're matching the plants to the conditions of your garden. Because right plant, right place, so will reduce the stress and susceptibility to pests. Another way to help your soil health throughout the winter and throughout the year is to increase your permeable surfaces. When it does rain, knock wood, hopefully it will start maybe tomorrow. We do want that any water that hits your garden to enter that soil. We don't want it rushing off into the waterway, into the sewer. That's just a waste. We want it entering your soil either through a pathway or through your garden beds, because the more soil that will infiltrate the garden and be held there is going to be, overall, it'll be, the more water will be available to your plants throughout the year, especially if you have nice, healthy soil with lots of organic matter and good holding capacity. All right, so that's all the ways we can build our healthy soil. And then there's also, absolutely, you can buy soil from nurseries and hardware stores like Sloat. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the different kinds of soil that you can buy, just because there's a few differences. Planting mix, or sometimes it's called garden soil, is designed to be mixed into existing garden soil, usually at 50-50. So you have your garden bed in the ground already. You can add that planting mix in about, half the volume. And it's designed for that. It has a lot of organic materials that's going to add nutrients, retain water, and then break up any hard soil. Like it's going to have gypsum in it, and it will improve drainage. So you can add this planting mix at any time you're adding new plantings. So that's either veggies or just, now if you're planting perennials, you can add planting mix and or compost when putting new plants in the ground. And then potting mix is a little different. It's designed for containers and pots, raised beds. So it has that mineral content that your native soil already has. So it's adding in either sand or pumice or other kinds of mineral materials in addition to organic materials that are so the mineral materials will add aeration, and then the organic materials will increase the water holding capacity and the structure of the soil. And with containers, there's a few things you can do. You can repot your soil. Your containers every year, adding fresh soil. You just take the plant totally out, shake off the old soil, and then put that fresh soil back in the same container. Or if you're going to move it to a bigger container, that's a great time to add fresh soil. It's going to refresh the nutrients to provide your plant more things to eat over the year. And then you can do that in addition. You can also fertilize throughout the year as well. Also, when containers you might notice that some containers do sink a little bit. You'll see the soil level decreasing. That's just the plant is using up that organic matter in the soil. So sometimes you can just add potting soil to the top layer of that pot. Just make sure to not crowd the crown of the plant. All right, so I hope it's clear now that healthy soil will lead to healthy plants and overall less pest problems. And then I just wanted to end on a little big picture note, what healthy soil can do for us as a climate solution. As well, it can do amazing things for your garden. It actually has a role in fighting the climate crisis, because healthy soil actually draws down and sequesters carbon. So through that process of photosynthesis, as carbon or carbohydrates are being pumped down into the soil for the microorganisms, that's drawing down the carbon dioxide in the air and pushing it down into the soil. And the less we do to disrupt that soil and the more we do to help the microbiology in that soil, it will keep that carbon in the soil. Healthy soil reduces the use of chemical inputs made from fossil fuels. So again, synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, when we don't use those anymore, we're reducing our use of fossil fuels. Healthy soil is resilient against drought and flood because it has high water infiltration and high water holding capacity. So if there's a big rain event, that water can actually just infiltrate the soil, enter down through the soil and be held there, as opposed to being run off into the street and the sewer. And then it can hold that water there also for times of drought, offering it to our plants later on. And for these reasons, it protects against soil desertification and erosion by keeping that soil really gluey, spongy, and have water in it all the time and alive. And then it reduces stormwater runoff. As I said, as long as there's good infiltration, that water can just enter the soil instead of being run off. And then if there is runoff pollution that enters our soil, that healthy soil, those soil microbes can actually filter out pollution before that water reaches the underground aquifers. I heard that compost filters out 60 to 85% of pollutants. So adding that organic material is really going to help that. And then just some online resources for you. Our Water Our World website has fact sheets about lots of different pests. I think there's about 18 different fact sheets. Some of them, though, are about plant care, lawn, rose care as well. And then we have this healthy garden fact sheet, which is going to give you a good, healthy, or an overview of how to just have your garden healthy with the planting diversity, healthy soil, looking for those beneficial insects. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you all for being here. Thank you to Sloat for having me, and I will stick around for questions.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, that was so amazing. I learned so much. I love thinking about plants sharing their sugar underneath the, like, it's so cute. It's very sweet that they, there's a community happening down there.
Absolutely, a community. It's an exchange.
Totally. Yeah.
And they're talking to each other. It's amazing.
I love it. I love it. I was going to share that when Charlotte was talking about fertilizing and putting energy towards the phosphorus and potassium this time of year, what we recommend is called bloom food, which could be confusing, but the numbers on the bag is 0, 10, 10. So we're not putting any energy to the above ground growth, but we are putting it towards the root development and the overall health. So that's what to use for fertilizer right now. And then also just in my line of work, I'm a designer, and I've had this conversation recently where, like 10 years ago or so, if people had a large space and they were going to plant it, we would recommend, getting a bunch of soil dumped and getting a rototiller and tilling it in. And now we're like, rototillers are bad. You don't, because now we know there's all of this stuff happening in the soil that the rototillers will disturb and kill off, frankly. And so I just feel like it's critical information if you are doing a big garden project, just to, when you dig the holes, dig the hole 1.5 times the size of the plant and mix in the compost in the planting hole, put the compost around the plants, but don't go digging around rototilling all over the place because we don't want to disturb the community down there.
Yeah. And the best you can do that. I will say that I don't want to like stress people out with like, if they have a raised veggie bed or something, amending the bed, mixing some things into the top few inches of the soil is okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can go extreme and not do it at all, but also doing that a little bit is okay. You're not going to like you're not going to destroy everything, but just being sensitive that when you are doing it, do it gently and do it really just as shallow as you can.
Definitely. So we do have some questions. One question is, do you fertilize and compost on top of existing mulch?
You can. I'd recommend just moving the mulch aside the best you can, and then fertilizing and composting in that top 1 or 2 inches of soil, and then putting the mulch back on. It's just going to be a more direct contact with the soil.
Yeah. And then how would you layer a brand new raised garden bed from bottom to top? Should you do it now for spring planting or wait until spring?
I guess that's up to you. In our Bay Area climate, you can grow things now if you do want to do veggies or anything now. One, I would start at the bottom. I would start with gopher wire for sure. Layer, if your garden bed is on top of other soil, I highly recommend lining that raised bed with gopher wire so that you don't have to deal with gophers in the spring or now. I don't know. I don't know if I would wait or just do it now. You could start with some soil and then plant your cover crops. Really, you just don't want to leave that soil bare, sitting there to dry out, to get damaged, to blow away. So I guess that's up to you. You could also put the soil down and put mulch on top as well. Any thoughts on that, Jen?
Yeah, well, I like to, in my raised beds, I like to like make like a like kind of like a soup of soil, and I'll put in earthworm castings and compost and organic potting soil and forest mulch. Like I just like to like mix it all in. You could just do just a straight organic potting soil. That's fine too, because that has a ton of nutrients in it. So it just depends on how many different bags of soil you want to use. Yeah. I've never heard of this before. What do you think of liquid aeration of a small area of turf? I don't know liquid aeration.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Maybe if Mary wants to elaborate on that in the chat, I'm happy to, but I don't know what that is. I don't know much about turf either. So I will share that. So
we did have, if you are interested in getting rid of your lawn, our last webinar was on how to get rid of your lawn, and I highly recommend it. There's a ton of recordings. So I see questions on watering and fertilizing and things like that. We've gone into a deeper dive on a lot of different topics, and you can find that list on our website. I think we're up to almost 40 different topics this year. And so if you are interested in more, specific things like that, feel free to check out the recordings. They're very helpful. And Charlotte was a part of watering and fertilizing classes too, before. Okay. So I have clay soil. How do I prepare for planting? Compost only or add soil conditioner?
I'm a big fan of compost, so I would say compost will probably do good things for you. I don't think you could go wrong with also adding a soil conditioner. I know Sloat has a lot of options. But also consider, if you're not ready to plant now, maybe consider doing compost with mulch over it, doing a little bit of a sheet mulching to let that really build up over the winter time. But yeah, I think you wouldn't go wrong with both but you could also do just compost.
Yeah. How do you feel about gypsum? I think we talked about this before, but gypsum for clay soil.
Yeah, I had to look it up last time. I got a question on that a few webinars ago, and I had to read a little bit more into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like it can be helpful, but I think long term you like kind of have to continue using it. And so compost, I think, is going to be more beneficial because it not only breaks up the soil, it will feed the soil as well and increase the microbiology. And it'll just only get better and better the more you use the compost.
Yeah.
Well, this compost.
Yeah, no, I know. I've since listening to your classes, I'm like totally like we were talking before the class, like I'm on the biodiversity train right now. And I'm like, I'm going to rip out like 20 roses in my garden and plant native plants and put compost everywhere and do native seeds. So I'm very happy for all the information you've shared and the inspiration and everything. Seriously, it's very valuable. I do want, we're at about an hour now, so I am going to close it down, but I do, we are here to support you. Charlotte has her info there, and you can also email me if you have any additional questions. And yes, this is being recorded, and the recording will be available on Tuesday, both on our website, Tuesday the 19th. Gosh, it's almost November. Anyways, yeah, so the recording will be available on Tuesday. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get a notification when it's up. And it's a lovely day. So everybody go get out there in their garden and put some compost all over and enjoy it. Thanks so much, Charlotte. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.